says selective segregation and injustice. In the 1950s and 1960s, the civil rights movement in the United States waged a war against segregation. At that time, many public restrooms, schools, and even drinking fountains were designated for use by whites only. Oklahoma required separate telephone booths for whites and Negroes. Arkansas designated separate gambling tables, and many courts kept separate Bibles for swearing in witness. As a result of the civil rights movement, such pre-principal practices were abolished. Similar campaigns also fought segregation by caste in India and dismantled the apartheid that existed in South Africa until the early 1990s. But ironically, one of the results of the new tolerance is a new wave of segregation and division along ethnic and cultural lines. For example, the University of Pennsylvania recently funded a Black yearbook, even though only 6% of the students' body is Black, and all other groups appeared in general yearbook. Vassar Dartmouth and the University of Illinois have allowed separate graduations, activities, and ceremonies for a majority of students. California State at Scramble has established an official college within a college for Blacks and the intentional Black buyers and manufacturers. Expo and Conference Association represent more than 1,000 Black-owned businesses, and recently informed large American firms like Hallmark Cards and Giant Food that products related to Kwanzaa, the late December celebration of African heritage, should be reduced and sold only by Blacks. A similar incident occurred when Westman Jonathan Price and Filipino Lee Solange were cast to play the leads in the musical Miss Saigon on Broadway. Asian actors participated, a white actor playing the role of a sleazy Vietnamese pimp trying to immigrate to the United States. By the end of the year, the producers awarded the role to someone with the appropriate racial qualifications. Filipino-Chinese actor Francis Barber, perhaps the most dramatic example of the selective segregation, is justice equivocation is occurring in Quebec, Canada, where the drive to political separate French Quebec from the rest of the nation has gained increasing momentum. Charles Krogman says the bitterness of French Canada's drive to eliminate its century-old confrontation with English Canada tells us much about our unassailable belief in strength and beauty of multiculturalism. They're living a refutation of the warm and cozy notion based more on hope than on history of multiculturalism. Multicultural harmony and strength. One looks at Canada and wonders whether the current naive and confident American celebration of cultural diversity, with its insistence on rights over individual rights, such occurring history over American history, ethnic culture over common culture, is leading us down a path from which there is no escape. In the world of new tolerance, selective discrimination and segregation are not only legitimate but laudable if the discrimination or segregation favors a majority group over the so-called dominant culture. In the U.S. and Canada, of course, this dominant cultures are utterly identified as white, male, English-speaking, and Christian, of course. Who gets to define which cultures are dominant is unclear, and whether such dominance can be shown objectively is never considered. Because in the postmodern view, truth does not exist, only the power to win the argument or promote one's own ideologically matters. By drawing such false equations, the new tolerance creates a new lexicon for society that evaluates postmodern ideas and suppresses the Christian ideas of righteousness, conviction, freedom, and justice for all. And in so doing, it threatens your rights and your faith, as well as those of your children in your church. In the ocean of Orwell's creation, disagreement and dissent were labeled fought crimes and were severely punished. The era of the new tolerance has ushered an airy Orwellian. Approach to disagreement. For instance, over the past 3 decades, I have addressed millions of high school and college students about Jesus Christ and his story or evidence for his life and resurrection. When I began touring and lecturing, I would often get heckled. I even welcome it at times because the hecklers would respond to the substance of my message, saying such things as "prove it," and "I don't believe you," thus giving me the opportunity to support my statements with evidence. In the past few years, however, I have witnessed a startling shift. Now, rather than responding to the substance of my message, my detractors invariably say things like, "How dare you say that? You're intolerant. Who do you think you are, that you have the corner on truth? And what right do you have to make a moral judgment on someone else's lifestyle?" The issue is no longer the truth of the message, but the right to proclaim it, because any message that challenges the new tolerance, either explicitly or implicitly, constitutes a thought of crime. And just as in Orwell's vision, one of the tactics of the new tolerance is to respond to such thought crimes with punishment and persecution. For example, in January 1994, the Supreme Law Debacle Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, known as RICO, applied not only to organized crime but also to abortion protest groups, such as Operation Rescue. RICO has not been applied so vigorously, if at all, to other protesters such as labor groups, animal rights organizations, environmentalists, or homosexual activists, as Frank Jameson, professor of the law of the University of Denver and a former Colorado country judge, commented, "If I were an abortion protester and had a little to protect, like my house, I might think twice before joining Operation Rescue." Abortion protesters seem to hold a special status due, perhaps, to their politically incorrect views. Forrest M. Memsfree, an accomplished freelance writer, was apparently guilty of thought crimes too. Mims had received an offer from the editor of Significant American to be the new author of the magazines. The animator said in its column when the magazine flew him to New York for a formal interview, The editor noticed several Christian magazines on Mim's writing resume. He stopped me there, recalls Mims, who was a deacon and Sunday school teacher at First Baptist Church of Seagram, Texas. He said, "Do you accept the Darwin theory of evolution?" I said no, and the rest of the meeting went downhill very rapidly. After that, Mims was amazed at the turn the question took. He was also asked, "Are you fundamentalist Christian? Are you a fundamentalist Christian, and do you believe in the sanctify of life?" Milf was guilty of all right. His crime, holding the wrong beliefs and not holding the right ones. For such fraught crimes, the significant American sent Mims packing, rejecting him as the author of the magazine's most popular column. After all, some things just can't be tolerated. The strategies and tactics of the new tolerance encouraging, doublethink, employing newspeak, and undertaken thought crimes are not only reminiscent of Orwell's 1984, they also pose a clear and present danger to anyone, you and your family included, who does not bow to the teachings of postmodernism. Responding to the questions about his experience with significant American Mims warned, I tried to turn to the other cheek for now, but at some point, I got to put a halt to this kind of discrimination. Before it gets too advanced. If Christians don't act now, it may be you who doesn't get a job next time. It is time for Christians to respond. If we do not, our freedoms will be increasingly eroded, and our children's faith will be increasingly undermined. Our culture will crumble all around us, and our churches will be destroyed from within. But for that response to be effective in diffusing the new tolerance and preserving the faith for us and our children, we need to do more than simply defend our civil and religious rights. We need much more than that. We need far better than that. We need a strategy, a plan. We need a positive response that will not only defend but also advance the kingdom of heaven. It's too dark. I got the person downstairs was new tolerance person, but I will keep teaching her religion is false. Lady, your religion is false. Your little Hindu fake gods and your Buddhisms and your Islams. So it says, I've seen the skit performed many times at youth retreats and church camps, and unexpected actors draft into the starring role and given instructions. When the time for the skit comes, the actor enters, crying slowly across the floor of the stage or meeting room, gasping and panting. Water, water, the actor's tongue lolls from his mouth, and he repeats in a rasping voice, water, water. He drags himself a few more feet and then repeats his dramatic line, water, water. Finally, a fellow cast member appears on stage and a moves in the moves that surprises both actor and audience. It throws a bucket of water in the poor actor's face. It is a hilarious moment, of course, if a little bit cruel. But why is the skit's climax so shocking and funny? Because the actors plea receive an unexpected and to first see man or a woman crying across a desert effective response. The plea for water, water was a desperate cry for a drink. But the response, while it was maybe morbidly for refreshing to both giver and receiver, does no good. Similarly, Christians have typically responded to the new tolerance in ways that, while they happen morbidly satisfying, have proven woefully insignificant. Our responses have ranged from capitulation attempting to mend our voice, to bend our beliefs, to moderate in order to make them more acceptable, to conflict attempted to win back by political means the Christian consciousness that has been lost in Western countries and cultures. Like, I don't understand, like, you can't practice your own faith in your own apartment without people listening to you. Like, if you believe a religion is wrong, do you teach Jesus is the only way to salvation? How are the neighbors up there listening hard to your conversations, your readings, like, if they're not eavesdropping? And then they're getting offended and they're doing little things on the side, low key, because they think they won't get caught, to harass you, low key, because they don't like you. Because they don't like what you said about their religion. And so they're doing sneaky things low key to you. Like making loud sounds in the morning time, trying to wake you up. But that person is harassing me, eavesdropping, listening to me. But regardless, I'm not going to change my views for her. Like, nobody doesn't care about her. Nobody doesn't care about nobody in this apartment, like, who's offended. Like, nobody doesn't care. Like, I'm sticking to my views. Our response has ranged from capitulation, attempting to mend our ways, to bend our beliefs, to moderate in order to make them more acceptable, to conflict attempting to win back by political means the Christian consensus that has been lost in Western countries and cultures, but neither of the extremes nor middle ground of compromise between them is appropriate or effective. So if cooperation, compromise, and conflict are not the answer, what is? How do we counter a cultural movement that threatens to undermine our children's faith and erode their convictions of the right and wrong? How do we maintain a Daniel-like stand for truth and righteousness in the face of ridicule, even persecution? What is an effective Christian response to a culture steeped in the postmodern doctrine of the New Tolerance? An Asian Jew who faced an anti-Christian culture that persecuted and eventually killed him once said there is a more excellent way in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 31. It is the way of love. Oh, brother, you might be tempted to respond. Is that the best you can do? It may sound simplistic. After all, the New Tolerance is a complex doctrine, a persuasive doubt movement, and it has brought about a culture that is fiercely antagonistic to Christians and to the Christian faith. And there's no time to whistle a happy little rendition of all we need is love. But what I'm suggesting is far from simplistic, because the kind of love I'm talking about is far from the syrupy counterfeit of love that exists in the popular conception. In fact, I believe that the reason the New Tolerance has gained ascendancy in our culture, and the reason the church response has hitherto been so effective, is because we have failed to understand what love really looks like. The image of the real Christian love has grown fuzzy and unfocused in our minds and in the minds of the world. As a result, if we ever hope to respond effectively to the New Tolerance, we must recapture what a Christian love looks like, what it is, what it does, and what it does not do. I have delivered a talk called Love Makes It Right to many thousands of youth and adults around the world. During the talk, I typically appeal to the audience, asking if anyone can give me a concise definition of love. And some have tried, but I never had one person offer a clear, satisfying definition of what love is. One occasion, I asked a crowd of 4,000 Christians to write the definition of love on 3x5 inch instant cards, which were later collected. Out of 4,000, only 7 people managed a biblically consistent definition of love. And here's the point: if we don't know what love really is, how can we do it? Oh, we think we know what love is. We know we're supposed to love God and others. But what does love look like? What does it do? How does Christian love act in culture dominated by New Tolerance? Does it mean ignoring the differing beliefs, values, and lifestyles of other people? Does it mean agreeing with them and approving of what they do? Does it mean participating in things God has called sinful? I believe the answer to these questions lie in several familiar passages of the Bible. Our problem, our lack of success in preventing and responding to the New Tolerance has not been because Christian love does not address our modern situation. It has been because we have not fully understood what love is. And because we don't know what love really is, we are unable to do it. The Apostle Paul, the Asian Jew I mentioned earlier, commanded Christians be imitators of God, therefore as dearly loved children, and live a life of love, just as Christ loved us. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 1, verse 2. Paul commands us to love just as Christ loved us. Why? Because Jesus is the incarnation of God, who is love. 1 John chapter 4, verse 8. If you want to know what real love is, take a long, hard look at Jesus. This is crucial for those of living in this age of New Tolerance, because as we pointed out earlier, the New Tolerance equates who I am with what I do, and goes on to assume that any disagreement with or criticism of what a person does is intolerant of the person himself or herself. The New Tolerance says, therefore, that loving acceptance means approval of even participation. in that person's belief, behavior, lifestyle, and truth claims. But that is not at all how Christ loved. He did not ignore the erroneous beliefs of others. He said to the Pharisees, "You are in error because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God." He did not agree with or approve of sinful behavior. He told the woman caught in adultery, "Go now and leave your life of sin." He did not participate in activities he disagreed with. The Bible says he was tempted in every way, just as we are, yet without sin. But he loved us while we were still sinners and gave himself up for us. That is what it means to love as Christ loved us. It means, first of all, recognizing that it is not only possible, it is essential to distinguish between who a person is and what a person does. A human being is more effectively more than simply the product of his culture or the sum of his beliefs and behaviors. In order to love as Christ loved us, we must recognize and remember and relate to each person as a human being created in the image of God. Max Lucado, in his book In the Grip of Grace, writes, "One of the finest gifts I ever received in a football sign by 30 former professional quarterbacks. There is nothing unique about this ball. For all I know, it was bought at a discount sports store. What makes it unique is the signatures. The same is true with us in the scheme of nature. Homo sapiens are not unique. We aren't the only creatures with flesh and hair and blood and hearts. What makes us special is not our body, but the signature of God on our lives, and we are his work of art. We are created in his image to do good deeds, and we are significant not because of what we do, but because of whose we are. Every human being in the world, butcher, baker, candlestick maker, African American, European, Asian, male, female, young, old, Hindu, Muslim, Catholic, Protestant, murderer or rapist, minister or cower, member, rich man, poor man, beggar, man, thief, is infinitely valued, work of art bearing the signature of God himself. A person for whom Christ died many years ago. Bob, the caller of this book, attended a box lunch at auction as a teenager, and the young woman in the group had each made a box of lunch for two. And only the offerer knew which woman had made which lunch. The young men were allowed to bid on the boxes, and then they would share the lunch with the woman who had made it. Though some carefully investigation, Bob managed to find out which lunch belonged to the young woman, and he was dating who later became his wife. Several of his friends, however, watched him carefully, and when he began to bid on that particular lunch, gave him a run for his money. They reasoned equally. It turned out that Bob would know which box lunch his girlfriend had made, and anyone who outbid him would get to have lunch with the beautiful young woman who had made it. They knew the true value of that box lunch because Bob let them see how much he valued it. Similarly, we can know the true and value of our fellow human beings by looking at how much God values them. God showed his great love for every one of us by sending Christ to redeem us with his life. Romans chapter 5, verse 8. This loving act ought to inspire an outpouring of love and respect and acceptance in us toward our fellow human beings. We know that the true value of every man, woman, and child among us, regardless of their faults, or foibles, or beliefs, or behaviors, their sins, or shortcomings, because God led us to see how much he values them by sending his son to die a cruel death to save them. To love others as Christ loved us means to recognize their infinite interest and value as human beings, altogether apart from their beliefs, behavior, lifestyle, or truth claims. Whether a person lives a life of virtue or vice, he or she is nonetheless made in the image of God, a priceless soul for whom Christ died. Whatever they look like, whatever they believe, whatever they do, whatever their lifestyle may be, every human being is of immeasurable worth. And if we love as Christ has loved us, we will accept and respect others on that basis. But that is not all we must do in order to recapture what Christian love looks like. An expert in religious law once asked Jesus, which is the most important commandment in the law of Moses. Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord and God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. And this is the first and greatest commandment." Matthew chapter 22, verse 36, verse 38. The first commandment Jesus quoted appears in the 6th chapter of Deuteronomy. Moses declared to all the people, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is your God. The Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might." Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, verse 5. Jesus was declaring that putting God first as the only one true God in our lives and loving Him completely was the greatest commandment. The 20th century Christians have done a fair job of preaching that message to the culture of new tolerance. Hear, O culture of the new tolerance, the Lord is our God. We proudly proclaim, the Lord is the one who in only absolute truth. If only our relativistic culture would hear our proclamation and acknowledge the one true God. But notice that Jesus didn't stop there. His answer to the religious leaders was not yet complete. After he quoted Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, verse 5, he said a second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. All of the other commandments and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments. Matthew chapter 22, verse 39, verse 40. It is just here that we Christians have misunderstood what real love is, and thus failed to respond equally to the challenge of the new tolerance. But it also is here that we can find the power to diffuse the new tolerance and make a Christ-like mark on this culture. What does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? We might answer, put others first or treat others the way you want to be treated. And I'm sure it includes that. However, it means much more. I have found that following a concise definition of Christ-like love has helped me understand how to love others as I love myself. In very basic terms, Christian love is making health, happiness, and spiritual growth of another person as important to you as your own. The Apostle Paul's words in the book of Ephesians offer further insight into how this definition of Christ-like love is lived out. In fact, what I have been saying in this chapter is a reflection of Paul's words in Ephesians 5. First, Paul instructed husbands, love your wife just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. He defined real love as being just as Christ loved, a sacrificial love, a love that valued the church so much that he died for it. Then Paul went on to say husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. That is the great commandment. Love Jesus talk about in Matthew chapter 22. Applied specifically to the marriage relationship. But the next verse explains what it means to live out Christ's command to love another as you love yourself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church. To love them means to nourish and cherish, but what does that mean? Well, to nourish means to bring to maturity. It means to care for and contribute to the health and validity of the whole person's mentality, physically and spiritually and relationally. In other words, if you love someone as you love yourself, you nourish that person. You help him or her grow in wisdom and start you in favor with God. Amen. Luke chapter 2, verse 52. For that reason, to love another person means to try to provide whatever is necessary to achieve his or her happiness, health, and spiritual growth. To cherish, other word Paul used to describe that it means to love another as you love yourself does not mean to adore or admire someone. It means literally to protect from the elements. Imagining that some newborn eagles high on a mountain crag, exposed to the sky. An angry thunderstorm is rolling in, and the mother eagle swoops down to the nest and spreads her wings over her offspring to protect them from the pounding rain and swirling wind. That's a picture of what it means to cherish someone. It means to protect that person from harm, whether physical, spiritual, or emotional. And most of us are pretty highly motivated to nourish, provide for, cherish, protect ourselves. We bundle up when we're cold and fan ourselves when we're hot. We duck to avoid an opponent blows and severe to elude an outcoming car. So where is I? Most of us, we feed our bodies and enrich our minds. We call the dentist when they toothache for us and reach for the medicine cabinet when a headache hits. Some of us even fasten our seatbelts to prevent physical injury. On the highway, a moderate of our fat and calorie intake to keep ourselves healthy. In short, we generally guard ourselves against harmful things and try to provide constructive and enjoyable life things for ourselves. But Ephesians chapter 5, verse 28, verse 29 suggests that Christian love means seeking for another person what we strive to attain ourselves. Christian love actually seeks to promote the good of another person. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 6, verse 7. It will attempt to provide for and protect the welfare of that person. That correct concept of real Christ-like love reveals what was wrong with Jim's attitude in his discussion with Chuck back in the chapter 2. Live and let live, Jim said, when discussing the homosexual lifestyle. But that comment expressed indifference, not love. Will a loving husband sit idly by his wife while his wife choked on a piece of food at the dinner table, concerned about sinful beliefs, behaviors, and lifestyles? Because as Max Lucado's was written, disobedience of God always results in self-destruction. Christ-like love does not just hate the sin, but love. It seeks to prevent the love, suffering, and pain that eventually imply his disobedience. So true compassion, love that seeks to provide for and protect another person's health, happiness, and spiritual growth could not comply with this cultural call. If you love me, you endorse my behavior, because real love, true love, grieves over the inevitable results of wrong behavior. I'm not endorsing anybody's wrong behavior. The new tolerance is erroneously portrayed in today's culture as the most loving way to live. It is so associated in people's minds with such things as kindness, peace, cooperation, understanding, and even love. To violate someone else's behavior or belief is depicted and seen as the loving thing to do, but such tolerance is far from loving. And I'm convinced that Christians not only need a renewed revision of what love really looks like, what love does, we also need to grasp clearly what love does not do. It's scandalous for a Jewish man to speak to a woman other than a wife or a close relative in public, but the Jews shunned Samaritans. Nonetheless, Jesus spoke to the woman, a doubly loving act on his part. Notice, however, that he did not ignore the truth of her situation, but spoke lovingly and straightforwardly to her, addressing her lifestyle not as an unto lifestyle, but as a sinful lifestyle that was destructive to her health, happiness, and spiritual well-being. Just said, it's quite clear, true. Sir, the woman said, I can see that you are a prophet. Our fathers worship on this mountain, but you Jews claim that place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. Jesus declared, believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet the time is coming and has now come when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in spirit and truth. The woman said, I know that the Messiah, called Christ, is coming, and when he comes, he will explain everything to us. And Jesus declared, I who speak to you, I am he. Would it have been loving for Jesus to have ignored the truth of this woman's situation? Should we have validated her lifestyle choice? Did he act wrongly by attempting to show the woman the errors of it in her ways? Of course not. The loving thing to do was exactly what Jesus did. He did not ignore the truth, but sensitively showed that Samaritan woman the truth of her situation. And enduring, introduced her to the Messiah and presumably to new life. It was been said that the hate is not the true opposite of love. Indifference. If you love someone, you will not keep quiet about his drug addiction, will you? You will not avoid the subject of her involvement in a dangerous cult, right? You will not ignore his destructive sexual behavior or condition of her soul, will you? If you love the person, you will not act differently toward dangerous or destructive beliefs or behavior simply to avoid offending them or her. Yet the new tolerance demands just a sort of indifference. Tolerance says, you must agree with me. Love responds, I must do something harder. I will tell you the truth because I'm convinced that the truth will set you free. Tolerance says, you must approve of what I do. Love responds, I must do something harder. I will love you even when your behavior offends me. Tolerance says, you must allow me to have my way. Love responds, I must do something harder. I will plead with you to follow the right way because I believe you are worth the risk. Tolerance seeks to be inoffensive. Love takes risks. Tolerance is indifferent. Love is active. Tolerance costs nothing. Love costs everything. Once again, Jesus is the supreme example of true Christian love, which is sometimes the envious of tolerance. His love drove him to the cruel death on the cross. Far from being indifferent to the lifestyle choices of others, he paid the price of those choices with his own life and lovingly paved the way for everyone to go and sin no more. John chapter 8, verse 11. Another example of what real love won't do is this love won't minister condemnation. It won't leave a person feeling condemned, but it will offer hope or forgiveness and restoration. If anyone had the right to condemn sinners, it was Jesus. He was perfect without sin, yet God did not send his right. God did not send his son. It's weird. And started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to him, if any one of you is without sin, let him cast the first throw the stone at her. Again, he stooped down, wrote on the ground, and the youths who heard began to go away at one time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left. Dude, you really think I was a criminal? With his finger, when he kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "If any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older one first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are you?" Where are they? Has no one condemned you? No one, sir, she said. Then no, neither do I condemn you. And Jesus declared, "Go now and leave your life of sin." Notice that Jesus differentiated between the woman and her behavior. And while he did not ignore her sin, commanding her to abandon her life of sin, he communicated love and mercy to her. Not condemnation, neither do I condemn you. This is what real love looks like. John Scott, writing on the Romans 2, verse 1, verse 2 in his book, Romans, God's Good News for the World, warns that Christians are not expected either to suspend our critical falsities or to renounce our criticism and rebuke of others as illegitimate. We are, however, prohibited from standing in judgment on other people and condemning them, which as human beings we have no right to, whatever, especially when we fail to condemn ourselves. It is that very porch that we must reclaim if we ever hope to love as Jesus loves. We must continually and distinguish between a person and the person's belief, behavior, lifestyle, and true claims. We must communicate Christ's love, Christ-like love and acceptance for the person, even if we disagree with that person's belief or however that person's behavior. And we must neither ignore the truth of that person's situation or minister condemnation to him or her. We must communicate Christ-like love and acceptance for that person, even if we disagree with that person's belief or whatever, of that person's situation or minister combination to him, The decision allows us to strike biblical balance of aggressively living in love with our harmony, standing for truth. I know. Notice that I suggest we aggressively live in love and humbly stand for truth. It is important to keep the two approaches straight. We must be aggressively in pursuing love because love is our commission. It is our great cause, our secret weapon for winning the hearts of men and women to the Lord Jesus Christ. At the same time, however, we must not neglect to stand for the truth. Not long ago, a student writing for a college newspaper defended the homosexual agenda, saying, "I suppose I can imagine what it would be like to believe that homosexuality is morally wrong. That makes me tolerant. But I think it's morally wrong to discriminate against people based on who they want to marry. Please don't send me hate mail quoting the anti-gay verses you all know. Jesus taught love before all else. Basically, all I ask from those who disagree with a homosexual lifestyle is for them to allow people to determine their own values." There is much that could be said about that writer's appeal for tolerance, but the comment that Jesus taught love before all else may be most revealing. Jesus taught love, but never at the express of truth. Because real love will not ignore the truth. His word teaches that we should love in the truth, 2 John chapter 1 verse 1, and speak the truth in love, Ephesians chapter 4 verse 15. Yet I believe it's imperative to also be humble and seeking after a standing for truth, because we do not have the authority within ourselves to judge right or wrong. We have the right to judge right and wrong with Christians. Neither can we personally determine truth. We only humbly point to what God says on the matter. When it comes right down to it, we don't have a corner on truth, but we can humbly and lovingly remind others of the God does. The problem is Christians have too often failed to respond that way to people whose views are unbiblical or whose actions are immoral. We have to often stop for short of the Christ-like response of love and compassion instead of ministering condemnation of people's belief or behavior. Instead of aggressively loving those who believe or behave differently than we do, and humbly pointing them to the truth. We have time to restrain expressing love and acceptance and ignorance and speaking truth as though we rather than God. Well, I be speaking in my own house and people be listening. So yeah, I'm allowed to speak in my own house freely. God had the authority to judge those outside the church. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 12, verse 13. And final, and that's the Holy Spirit is the missionary, convincing the world of sin, righteousness, and judgment. And we are asked to be witness of crucified and risen Christ, not judges over others. Blah, blah, blah. So what does it mean in practice? We are to judge people. It says in the Bible, you're supposed to judge Christians. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus, as a tax collector, and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, being a short man. He could not because of the crowd, so he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming the way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he is going to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the son of the man came to seek and to save what was lost. These weirdos. Being like all the people saw and began to mutter, "He has begun to be the guest of a sinner." But Zareth stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." And Jesus said to them, "Today salvation has come to the house, because the man too is a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek to save the ones lost." Now Zareth was a sinner. He had lived a good life of greed and extortion, and his scripture account gives no indication. That Jesus spoke any word of criticism. What do they mean of criticism? If Jesus spoke any word of criticism, condemnation to Lazarus, he would have, of course, Jesus was God incarnate and had every right to point a finger at the man's conduct, but there is no indication he did. Notice what Jesus did instead. He said, "Lazarus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." And he communicated loving acceptance by expressing a desire to spend the day with the tax collector. They like to listen, they like to gossip, they like to talk about you, and that's why they like to come and listen to you when you talk. Yeah, right. Notice what Jesus did instead. He said to Lazarus, "Calm down immediately. I must stay at your house today." He communicated loving acceptance by expressing a desire to spend the day with the tax collector. Notice too how Lazarus responded to Jesus' acceptance. And they probably say, "Yeah, she's a homophobe because she doesn't like homosexuals. That's why they keep watching me too." And that's not the case. I'm a Christian and I don't agree with the lifestyle. I can't help that you're a liberal or a new tolerant person that doesn't understand that. And anyway, you should mind your own business in your own apartment. Zareth brought subject of his own. "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." It's like the other thing. They didn't say, I don't agree with other religions. I think all religions are false. I think Jesus is the only way to salvation. Now they're looked at that as I'm a hate monger. I hate people in other religions, and that's not true. I just don't agree with their lifestyle. I'm strictly on my Christian convictions of Jesus being the only way to salvation. That's not to attack people or to harass them or make them feel bad. This is my belief of my confidence in my Jesus Christ and my God, that I believe he's the only way. But they should be in their own apartments, not in my life, listening to me. Like, it's like weird. I don't know. Say be nice. Be nice. There's a certain time I'll be nice and be true to my convictions. And it's not my fault it offends people. So I'm gonna read this. I don't want to read this. Like, Jesus was considered a friend of sinners. He showed them acceptance by eating with them. He showed them comfort by healing their infirmities, and he showed them attention by giving his time to them. And he gained an audience with them because he looked beyond their sin and sought to meet their needs. Dr. David Ferguson, an excellent book, The Great Commandment Principle, helps us understand this crucial point. What happened in Jesus' incredible encounter with Zacchaeus, paraphrasing a popular song from several years back, Jesus looked beyond his fault and saw his need, and when the love of Christ touched the wrist at that point of his need, that love constrained the sinner to confess his sin and make things right. In other words, Christ's love ministered to the man's deep need, and Zacchaeus responded to that love by dealing with his fault. If Jesus had simply reduced Zacchaeus in a tree for his sinful behavior, it had gone his way. Would the results have been the same? Probably not. No doubt Zacchaeus had been rebuked directly by the religious leaders of the day, who were not about to defile themselves. Preferentializing him with Jesus, however, discerned the tax collector's needs as well as dishonest need, like everyone else. Zacchaeus needed attention, acceptance, respect, etc. But he was also seeking to meet those needs in sinful ways. Once he experienced Christ's loving acceptance, Zacchaeus was ready to receive the truth about his sinful ways. This is the more excellent way to which Christians are called, a way to enter into a relationship with a needy world and offer it love and acceptance. I know what they're talking about, love and acceptance of what their behaviors, because I don't accept their behaviors. Love, nearly word offered love and acceptance. This is more an excellent way to which Christians are called, a way to enter a relationship with a needy world and offer it love and acceptance. It's acceptance of what? Acceptance of their behaviors, because that's not what the Bible teaches. The living Christ bids us to enter into relationships with others. I don't want to get in relationships with unbelievers that don't have the same mindset as me as Christ, that want to encourage me to live deeper in God. I want to find friends that's deeper, my relationship with Christ. And pick my friends wisely. Like, I don't want to be friends with people that leads me to sin. The living Christ bids us to enter in a relationship with others, even those beliefs or behaviors similar to us. And I said, there is ministered the love and acceptance of Christ toward them. It was the presence of Christ in relationship that shows that had his sin and changed his lifestyle, his life. Similarly, the Lord wants each of us to enter in a really loving and accepting relationship with those who don't know him. Or Son of Man came to seek, save. I'm here to preach the gospel to them, though. So, Luke chapter 19, verse 10. For too long, the primary Christian outreach method was consisted of inviting unchurched people to church. There's nothing wrong with that, of course, and many have been brought to salvation by such a simple invitation. But I strongly believe that the Lord wants us to break out of our Christian ghetto, seek out those with non-Christian beliefs, behaviors, and lifestyles, and invite them into our homes. Behaviors and lifestyles, and invite them into our homes, eat with them, exercise with them, sit with them when they're sick, and expose them to the presence of Christ through this Holy Spirit who is alive in us. The approach has suppression does not engage one-on-one evangelism that is just as relevant as ever. Neither is substitute for teaching the truth. I have dedicated my life to telling the world the truth. What I'm suggesting is a compilation to trumpet evangelism, a platform from which the truth can be more effectively told. We must remember that we serve a true God who loves sinners. For God so loved the world that he gave us his one and only Son. This is the verse, John chapter 3, verse 16. The new tolerance requires people to accept all people. The new tolerance requires people to accept all beliefs and behaviors as legitimate, worthy of approval, and even practicing true Christian law will go much further. It will attempt to recognize the relational need behind a new person's belief or behavior, just as Jesus did. I am convinced that as this Christian vegan, I don't even know what I'm gonna read. Like this stupid, like what they're saying, really doesn't make any sense. I don't accept people's false religion. I don't accept people's homosexual lifestyle. I'm convinced that a Christian begins to sincerely befriend even the most militant homosexuals and most dedicated abortionists, or the most hardened criminals, and recognize and respond to their relational needs to appeal of the new tolerance. To appeal of the new tolerance. No, I won't appeal to the new tolerance. What are they talking about? Or begin to pout in the light of true Christian love, whatever. My son's scene was a high school senior when I asked him, in 12 years old, 12 years of school, where were you ever taught any absolute truth? Sure, he said. Surprised, I asked, what absolute truth have you learned in public schools? He shrugged. Tolerance, he said. I must admit that I was surprised then, but no longer. A generation or more ago, schools focus on such subjects as English, history, math, and science today, and one of the primary goals of many educators of primary, secondary, collegiate levels is to teach and promote the new tolerance, as the following story illustrates. Shauna stood at the front door, packed and ready to leave for the weekend with her friend Tyrion. And when do you get home from the school conference with Tyrion? Her mother asked her, fluffing her hair as she spoke. It's a 3-day conference, Shauna answered. We'll be back Sunday evening about 6. And what is this conference exactly? Shauna told her mother about the conference before, but not exactly. If Shauna had told everything, her mother would have freaked out and quick slammed the door on the whole weekend. Young Women Leadership Conference at the Hilton in San Francisco, she answered. Taryn says, it's the best way to get into the student government at Reagan High School. The student council advisor is taking 10 girls from Reagan and Tyrion and got me in. It was all true, but that's what Sheridan was not telling her mother, was that a major until plan for the conference was intolerant. After checking into the downtown Hilton next day, Shauna and Tyrion went for pizza with Reagan's students advisors. Lisa, Carmia, and they were discussing the topics of the conference listed in the program when one of the other students said that she sometimes got confused when people talked about tolerance. She wasn't sure what it really meant sometimes. Tolerance is the highest of all virtues, Miss Carmilla was smiling. It's the highest virtue because it's knowledge and celebrates the personal rights and values of all cultures. I don't celebrate people's cultures that go against the Bible and people's. But it's often misunderstood because the fundamentalists in our culture haven't properly defined it. Miss Carmilla turned her soda straw between one of her fingers. The virtue of tolerance is based on the reality that everyone is equal in value. Nobody at this table is better than anyone else. Who said they was any better than anybody else? The girls nodded as if uncool. That's right. We're different from each other in a lot of ways, but we're all equal in value. And if all cultures and all persons are equal in value, then all lifestyles are equal. Tolerance is simply accepting and respecting another person's belief. Tolerance is simply accepting. I'm not accepting of their beliefs or lifestyles if it goes against the Bible. And respecting another person, respect the person, yeah. Person beliefs and lifestyle choices. Shauna nodded along with the other girl. She suspected her mom and her pastor probably would find something wrong with Miss Caroline's ideas, but Shauna couldn't find any fault with them. After all, Miss Caroline was a teacher. She obviously knew what she was talking about. Shauna's fictional experience, drawn from the novel Road of a Tolerance, is typical of the experience of many of our children in public schools and universities today, from grade school children to grad students. The message of the new tolerance is having a profoundly negative effect on the education system. And more important, on our children. There are 6 major areas that are being negatively affected. The new tolerance is stifling scholastic achievement, devaluing educational substance, rewriting history, ignoring facts, restricting freedoms, and denying parental rights. Short of complete isolation, how you respond to the influence of the new tolerance on our education system. How can we diminish the new tolerance negative effects on our children and on their education? First and foremost, we must apply the more excellent way in each situation. Remember that Christians are called to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, verse 14. A loving response does not require that we compromise or capitulate to our culture regarding what is best for our children. Neither does it require that we engage in a holy war with the education system. A well-informed Christian exercise Christ-like love can counter the culture effectively by adopting a wise as servants and harmless as doves approach. Matthew chapter 10, verse 16. We share a word for all our differences of politics, race, economics, abilities, culture, and language. We share one world to be tolerant. Is to welcome the differences and delight in the sharing. So begins the introduction to website homepage of Teaching Tolerance magazine, a publication that is offered free to school teachers and administrators. By the Southern Poverty Center, tolerance can be taught. Editor Sarah Brolick words, not just talk about it. Teachers have their own styling variety of techniques that work and well share with them, with you. Tolerance is an idea that is universally relevant and it belongs everywhere in the curriculum, where you will read about teachers and students working together to improve race relations, respect religious diversity, ability differences, dispel gender abuse and homophobia, confront hate, and build a classroom community. Don't miss the importance of boldest claims. Tolerance belongs everywhere in curriculum. This means, practically speaking, that new tolerance should be taught in history classes, art classes, science classes, even math classes. In fact, the National Council of Social Studies in 1992 curriculum guidelines for multicultural education claims that education for multicultural, which is new tolerance applied to diverse cultures, requires more than a change in curricula and textbooks. It requires system-wide changes that permeate all aspects of school. The goal of teaching tolerance everywhere attends to university as well. According to the concept of Stern, teaching diversity should be an educational mission that structures a campus. And Stephen B. Rating, The American Enterprise, sums it up with these chilling words. Tolerance may indeed be the dominant theme of the modern curriculum. The authors of a recent study at American high schools conclude tolerating diversity in the moral glue that holds schools together. One study of American history books found toleration present as the only religious idea worth remembering. Not only is tolerance often considered the only religious idea worth remembering, but the new tolerance appears to be the only virtue that many consider worthy of illusion in school circumcisions. Consider the following a statement made by the top official of the New Hampshire chapter of the National Education Association to George W. Ferdolf, chairman of New Hampshire Christian Coalition, and a specialist in education at the recent education forum in the state. If children come to school with different values than those they are taught at school, teachers should encourage the kids to discard the lessons their parents are teaching. Frightening, isn't it? Yet that is precisely what must happen and what is happening in this era of this new tolerance. Primary, secondary, and post-secondary levels throughout the U.S., Canada, and other Western nation, books and classes are being revised to make school more exclusive, more diverse, more sensitive, gender neutral, anti-racist, and disability aware. Some of the changes are positive. It is good for students to learn not only about William Shakespeare and George Washington, but also about Sequoyah, the inventor of the Cherokee alphabet, Martin Luther King Jr., and Gandhi. It is good for us. I don't understand, why would I want to learn about something about Gandhi that's a false religion? It is good for us to learn from the often neglected recent literature, drama, and customs of the other cultures. I guess we will learn about it, but not fall down to their little belief systems. Unfortunately, however, the agenda of the new tolerance is far deeper and darker than simply exposing school children to our cultures. Even at the primary and secondary levels, the proponents of the new tolerance are carrying on a campaign of indoctrination that is most noticeable and most dangerous in 6 areas. As we stated before, the new tolerance asserts not only that all culture are equal, but also that a person's identity is intricately, I don't find them equal, linked with his or her culture. Therefore, if students are to be treated tolerantly, they must be consistently treated and educated as members of their civic, racial, ethnic, or even sexual orientation group. To academic achievement. In reality, however, the development of self-esteem often ellipses learning goals in schools dominated by the new tolerance. Real achievement is often sacrificed in order not to harm students' self-esteem. For example, Richard Bernstein, in his book Dictatorship of Virtue, Multiculturalism in the Battle for America's Future, records account of a similar conduct by multiculturalist consultant. When the consultant begins a story, she was recently in Rothsbury. She referring to Boston's predominantly poor black neighborhood, where she watched as a young black child attempted to cope with a math worksheet involving the addition of 24 sets of 3 single digits like 2 plus 4 plus 3. She was trying to get these problems right. Recall said the alternative was to get him them wrong, but the girl didn't understand the math involved. She got the first problem wrong and got the others wrong also. So this is a situation within the win-lose world in which there no way the child can feel good about the assignment. Bernstein goes on to describe the constitute suggestions for helping the child feel good about the assignment, but denotes that Metatron never suggested that students into the girl's inability to do sums apparently avoiding and suggesting that the student's self-esteem might be improved by the true learning and achievement. Lynn Cheney, former Carlson National Endowment of the Humanities under President Reagan Bush, writes, education is about the pursuit of truth, and one of the characteristics of the new tolerance is that it turns education into something else, a procedure for making people feel good, for example, a way of building self-esteem. Education is not primarily about self-esteem. It is about learning to seek evidence, to evaluate information, to weigh conflict and opinions. This characteristic of new tolerance must concern all of us regardless of our skin color. Far too many of our precious children and young people of every race, color, and religion are neither learning nor achieving because their education system has turned many of their teachers into social workers, whose primary goal is not to educate but to help their students feel good about the assignment. But Christians can make a difference, particularly if we make every effort to lovingly challenge the notion that a person's identity is inseparable from his or her culture. Instead, promote the biblical basis for self-esteem, that is, that men, women, and children should be respected, and should respect themselves not because they are members of a specific racial, ethnic, or special sexual or orientation group, but because they are the unique and wonderful work of God. Proverbs chapter 139, 13, verse 14. Concentrate on loving and accepting people of every race, color, and religion, regardless of what they do, because who they are does not equal what they do. Help students experience love and acceptance, whether they bring home D's or A's on their report cards, even while you encourage more effort if that is necessary. Defend every child's right to learn tactfully, challenge critical, and do not prepare students of every race and religion to demonstrate competence in increasingly competitive global economy. So I think I'm just gonna start reading this for now.